All right, so today we're jumping into something really different. It's this collection of writings called O.D.D. And, the title itself kind of gives you a hint. It's a self-diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder. This is not some polished, published book. It's raw. We're talking journal entries, poems, rants, basically a direct line into a mind that's at war with that label, with itself, and pretty much the entire world. What we're going to do is piece together the big themes and try to map out the journey this author's on.
Okay, so let's start here. The author kicks the whole thing off with this powerhouse of a quote from Nietzsche, and honestly, it's the key that unlocks everything else. It really sets the stage. The idea here is that suffering isn't something you run from. No, it's a crucible. It's a force that forges strength. So keep that in your mind. That's the lens for this whole analysis.
With that idea of strength from Poison in mind, let's get into our first major theme, a powerful, unapologetic voice of defiance. We're going to start by looking at how the author literally forges an identity by just pushing back against everything, society, inner demons, you name it.
And boom, here it is. This is basically the author's Declaration of Independence. I mean, look how clear and absolute that language is. They're not just kind of questioning things. They are actively fighting for control of their own self. They're refuting what they call an alien entity, and who knows if that's a mental illness, societal pressure, or something else entirely.
And this just lays it out so clearly. This rebellion isn't just a mood, it's a program, a 4-step plan. And you gotta love the language here. Embrace this hell. It's not about escaping the fight, it's about owning it. It's about using that very hell as the fuel for an open, active rebellion.
And here, that rebellion just blows up to this almost mythological scale. The author doesn't see themselves as a victim, not at all. They're this powerful, destructive force, a hellspawn taking on all the pawns of the world. It's this incredibly aggressive way of reframing their place in the world, going from powerless to powerful.
Okay, so now let's see what happens when that internal defiance turns outward. The author points their critical eye at society, and well, the critique is absolutely scathing.
I mean, you can't get much more direct than that, can you? This isn't some gentle critique. It's a full-on declaration of death. The promise of society, that hope that's supposed to fuel everything, it's not just gone, it's been violently destroyed. This really sets the tone for a pretty brutal look at the world.
The author doesn't just stick to grand statements, though. They ground this critique in these really visceral, specific details. This list, it's just stuff they found in a park, but it acts as a perfect miniature for a larger societal decay. Every single item, the blistered Barbies, the syringe caps, tells a story of neglect and corruption. It's incredibly effective.
And this is how the author sees society reacting to all that decay. They actually coined this term, community poison, to describe how the system just labels and throws away its most vulnerable people, framing them not as human beings who need help, but as a blight on business.
And finally, we get to the source of the sickness, at least in the author's view, the media. The language here is just so strong, hypnotized, lobotomized. The idea is of a population that's been controlled and sedated by a system that's designed to keep them from seeing what's really going on.
So, we've looked at the war against the outside world. Now, we're going to turn inward. Because all of that chaos, all that criticism of society, it's mirrored by a conflict that's just as intense, maybe even more so, raging inside the author's own mind.
This entry is just, wow, it's a startlingly honest peek into that internal war. This discordant mind needs a release, right? And for them, that release is a physical act of destruction. It's violent, sure, but they also call it therapeutic. It's a perfect metaphor for all that internal pressure just looking for a way out.
Now look at the date here, exactly 1 year later. That is not a coincidence. It shows this recurring cycle of mental breakdown, this short circuit. The way it's phrased makes it sound like this plunge off the deep end is almost an expected annual event.
This slide really brings the nature of that internal war into focus. The author talks about walking a psychological wire between two extremes. On one side, you've got mania, which they describe as spontaneous pyrotechnics, and on the other, a depression so deep that a broken heart doesn't even fear loss anymore. It's a constant tightrope walk between explosive energy and just crushing numbness.
So, if society is a battlefield and your mind is a war zone, what happens to love and relationships? Well, in these writings, intimacy is definitely not a safe harbor. It's just another battlefield.
The author gives us this incredibly dense phrase to describe it all.
Let's just try to unpack that for a second. You've got pleasure from pain, which is sadomasochism. You've got psychological games, the psychosexual part, and then just conflicting feelings, ambivalence. It's a really unsettling but also perfect summary.
And you can see that complexity right here. On the one hand, there's this intense magnetic pull of seduction, this feminine mystique. But on the other hand, the inevitable result is anger and sadness. The desire for connection is always at war with the pain that it seems to bring.
So notice this. Pain and pleasure aren't opposites here. They're totally tangled up. In this dynamic, pleasure is actually gained through pain being dispensed. It's a relationship that's built on dominance, on control, and on digging into the darkest thoughts. Okay, this brings us to our last theme. After going through all this chaos, societal, mental, relational, where does it all end up? For this author, it leads straight to the act of creation. Art is the one thing that seems to come out of all this turmoil. This right here makes a direct line between suffering and art. The author isn't creating in spite of their pain. They're creating because of it. For them, the whole starved artist thing isn't just some romantic idea. It's a necessary sacrifice to make these visions real.
This is such a fascinating way for them to describe themselves, the anesthetic artist. Anesthetic means numbing, right? But at the same time, this artist is on an obsessive quest in a state of unrest. So they're both the detached surgeon clinically operating on themselves and the restless, obsessed patient who's feeling everything at once.
And here it is, the big reveal. The real engine driving this whole fractured, chaotic inner world. It's not demons, it's not destiny, it's ambition. The relentless, all-consuming need to create art is what's powering this entire machine.
The author slips in this quote from Milton's Paradise Lost near the end, and it feels like a really fitting, maybe even slightly hopeful way to wrap things up. It frames this whole collection of writing as this incredibly difficult journey out of a personal hell, with at least the possibility, no matter how far off, of reaching the light.
And that leaves us right here with this final, crucial question. Is taking all this pain and transforming it into art a way to heal from it? Or is the obsessive need to suffer for your art just another beautiful, complicated way of destroying yourself? The writings don't give us an easy answer, leaving us to think about the true cost of creating something out of chaos.